Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we sift through fascinating ideas to bring you essential knowledge quickly and clearly. Today, we're tackling a subject that, well, many find a bit intimidating, but we promise it's packed with surprising facts and really profound insights into how we think and live. We're taking a deep dive into the vast and, often misunderstood world of philosophy.
That's right. And while the word philosophy might conjure images of abstract thought in dusty libraries, it's actually about asking the biggest, most fundamental questions, questions about existence, about knowledge, our values, and ultimately about how everything hangs together.
Forget any preconceived notions you might have. Our sources today are going to take us far beyond ancient Greece, though they're definitely important. We'll explore the earliest philosophical stirrings across the globe, demystify the tools philosophers actually used to arrive at truth, and then zoom in on an iconic figure, Socrates, to really get a handle on what it means to lead an examined life.
Yeah, our mission is to make this complex subject not just understandable, but, relevant to you.
Let's unpack this. So we often hear the term philosophy, but what is it, really? I mean, our sources suggest that even defining it is kind of a philosophical activity in itself.
It's true, yeah. The word itself, philosophy, comes from the ancient Greek philia, meaning lover, and sophia, meaning wisdom, the love of wisdom.
Okay.
But this love of wisdom, this deep human curiosity, it began long before the Greeks even coined the term.
You mean it's like a universal impulse found across different cultures? Tell us about these early philosophical thinkers.
What's really remarkable is that this quest for wisdom wasn't just in one place. Across the globe, ancient India, China, Africa, Greece, we see these extraordinary figures emerging that we call sages.
Sages, right?
And these individuals weren't just, following tradition blindly. They had this healthy skepticism, a profound curiosity about the natural world, and a real commitment to using reason. Reason to understand nature, human nature, society. They were the original critical thinkers, really.
That's a powerful idea, that connection. Can you give us some standout examples from different traditions?
Certainly. So in India, for instance, you have the Saptarishi, the seven sages. They're central to what later became known as Sanatana Dharma, the eternal way of life.
Okay.
They were considered authors of the Vedas, gaining wisdom through these intense spiritual practices called tapas. Think of them as, part mythic figures whose insights really shaped a whole civilization. And interestingly, women like Maitreyi were right there, engaging in these deep philosophical dialogues, questioning things like attachment to material possessions in the Upanishads.
Wow, it's fascinating to see women involved so early on. What about in China?
In China, the Shang or sage tradition celebrates figures like the mythic Emperor Yu. He supposedly saved civilization by building canals and dams to control floods. These sages weren't just wise in an abstract sense. They were praised for political skill, devotion to work, practical innovation. The Chinese character for Sheng, for sage, even has a prominent ear, radical in it.
An ear?
Yeah, signifying this deep capacity for listening to divine insight, or maybe just profound truth.
That connection between listening and wisdom is really powerful. And Africa also had a sage tradition, right?
Yes, absolutely. Henry Odera Oruka's research highlighted what he called folk sages in African communities. These were people identified by their own communities as having this unique ability for rational inquiry into the real nature of things. They often challenged cultural norms, seeking deeper reasons for beliefs.
So a mix of tradition and critical thinking, and then Greece, where the word philosophy actually comes from.
Right. Among the ancient Greeks, Thales of Miletus really stands out, maybe the first philosopher, arguably. He's credited with predicting a solar eclipse, calculating pyramid heights, cornering the market on olive presses once, showing both scientific and practical smarts. He famously claimed all matter was fundamentally water and that things with internal motion, like magnets, had a soul, ideas that really influenced natural philosophy down the line.
A soul and a magnet. Interesting.
Yeah. And another Greek sage, Solon, he was a statesman. He introduced radical reforms in Athens, canceled debts, set up a constitutional government. He applied wisdom directly to making society better.
It really sounds like these sages were ancient scientists, engineers, political leaders, kind of all rolled into one, truly shaping their worlds with their intellect.
And this universal sage tradition, it naturally evolved into what we call natural philosophy. Thinkers started trying to explain nature using rational methods, not just relying on myths. The Milesians, who followed Thales, they looked for underlying causes for why things change in nature.
And this is a clear step towards modern science, isn't it?
Precisely. Think of Xenophanes. He explained rainbows and St. Elmo's fire as like cloud phenomena. That's a move towards scientific explanation right there. Or Parmenides, using pure logic to argue that fundamental existence must be unchanging. And Democritus, proposing that everything's made of tiny, unchanging bits of matter atoms. That idea directly connects early Greek thought to modern science.
Building on that, the Pythagoreans, they took this rational approach in a really unique direction, didn't they? Combining math, music, philosophy.
Oh, indeed. Beyond the famous theorem, they saw mathematical patterns everywhere. In geometric shapes, sure, but also in musical harmonies, in the movement of planets. This led them to believe in this unified, rational universe. They even thought the planets made music as they moved. Their community was known for intense scholarship, and significantly, women were involved. Pythagoras' wife Theano and their daughter Maya apparently made contributions applying philosophy to numbers, optics, even daily life.
So, from these ancient thinkers just observing the world to the Pythagoreans finding mathematical order, it really seems the human mind has always been trying to, well, make sense of it all. But how does this grand quest, all these diverse threads, come together into what philosophy is today in a modern sense?
That's where a 20th century American philosopher, Wilfrid Sellars, offers this really beautiful, concise vision. He defined philosophy's aim as, get this, to understand how things, in the broadest possible sense of the term, hang together. Broadest possible sense of the term.
Wow. Okay. How things hang together. That's broad. What does that actually mean for what philosophers study?
It means basically nothing's off limits, but they tend to focus on topics that are, as Sellars put it, informative and interesting. So maybe not counting grains of sand, but definitely trying to understand why people might believe conspiracy theories. Not, endorsing the theories, but analyzing the underlying human psychology, the reasoning, the evidence or lack thereof. Sellars also talked about philosophical skill as a kind of know-how. Yeah, knowing how different concepts connect and rely on each other and figuring out how to reconcile our everyday experience of the world. He called that the manifest image, how science explains it, the scientific image. Philosophy tries to keep an eye on the whole picture.
Okay, so philosophy aims to understand everything and how it all connects. Makes sense. But how do philosophers actually do that? What's in their toolkit, for arriving at truth?
Right. Well, it's not an empirical science like physics or biology, obviously. But philosophy does rely on various forms of evidence and pretty rigorous methods of inquiry to build a coherent understanding.
So it's not just sitting in an armchair thinking. There are actual sources of evidence they draw on.
Absolutely. One really fundamental source is history. Just looking back, the insights of past philosophers, sages, religious thinkers, they're invaluable. Questions about, say, the good life, or how society should be organized. These pop up again and again.
They're perennial questions.
Exactly. And past answers, thinkers like John Locke or Rousseau influencing the U.S. Constitution, or Confucius still influencing leaders in China, they still inform our thinking today. We learn from them.
Okay, that makes sense, learning from the past. But what about that knowledge that seems to come from within? Stuff that feels almost self-evident.
That brings us to intuition. Now, trace back to Plato's Nose. This isn't some vague gut feeling.
Right, not just I feel like.
No. Think of how René Descartes described it. A clear and attentive mind, where knowledge is so distinct, so clear, there's just no room for doubt, like 2 + 2 = 4.
Okay, undeniable.
Or a 3-legged stool has 3 legs. It can even extend to morality, like the basic intuition that, is better to be good than to be bad. Philosophers learn to distinguish these really certain intuitions from just, opinions or beliefs.
So a kind of rock-solid clarity. But what about just everyday observations, things we see and take for granted? Does common sense play a role?
It does for some philosophers, yeah. Common sense, in this context, refers to specific claims based on direct sense perception that seem undeniably true. G.E. Moore famously tried to prove the external world existed by simply holding up his hand and saying, "Here is one hand."
Just like that.
Pretty much. For common sense philosophers, some things are just known. They don't need further proof. They form a kind of foundation.
Fascinating. And I heard there's something called experimental philosophy that sounds almost like science.
It is, in a way. It's a newer movement, relatively speaking. It actually tests philosophical concepts using empirical methods, often borrowed from psychology.
Like how?
Well, for example, researchers might set up scenarios and survey people to see if they believe free will is necessary for someone to be held morally responsible. It's about bridging the gap between abstract philosophical theories and what average people actually think or intuit about these issues.
Okay, so seeing if the theories line up with real human experience. And I guess other sciences play a role too.
Definitely. Philosophers absolutely welcome results from other disciplines, whether it's physics or biology giving us information about the world, or psychology and sociology telling us about human nature. The goal is to build the most comprehensive picture possible, the whole truth, using all reliable sources of knowledge.
So it's like gathering all the best materials, but then how do they actually how do they construct that strong, consistent house of beliefs you mentioned?
Right, that's where logical reasoning and conceptual analysis are crucial. Logical reasoning is basically the science of reasoning itself. It helps formalize arguments,
Making sure they hold water.
making sure that claims, the conclusions, are properly supported by the reasons given, the premises. It also involves reasoning backwards, sometimes like a detective. You see the evidence, the observations, and you infer the most likely causes. And a big part is checking for coherence, making sure a set of beliefs is logically consistent. Can all the parts be true at the same time? If you find contradictions, you know at least one belief must be false. It flags up a poorly founded system.
Okay, so ensuring the structure is sound. And what about understanding the individual bricks, the concepts themselves? You mentioned conceptual analysis.
Yeah, that's conceptual analysis. It's about breaking down complex ideas into simpler components to really clarify their meaning. One really useful tool here is using descriptions, like Bertrand Russell's idea of definite descriptions.
How does that work?
Well, imagine someone says, Kevin used up all the printer paper. And, three Kevins work there. You ask, which Kevin? And they say, oh, the one with brown hair whose desk is by the entrance. That unique description singles out that specific Kevin.
Ah, I see. It removes ambiguity.
Philosophers use this kind of technique to untangle tricky concepts and make sure everyone's talking about the same thing.
That's something we probably do all the time without thinking about it. And then there are thought experiments. Those sound pretty cool.
They are. Thought experiments are basically hypothetical scenarios you construct in your mind to test or compare concepts. Plato did this in the Republic family. He imagined this whole ideal city, this elaborate thought experiment, just to figure out what justice really is.
Like a mental laboratory.
Or, in ethics, philosophers constantly use them. They'll invent a tricky moral dilemma to see if a particular ethical theory leads to, say, an absurd or immoral conclusion when you apply it. It's a way to road test ideas without needing a physical lab.
So with all these tools, history, intuition, logic, analysis, thought experiments, it sounds like philosophers are constantly refining their understanding, even if there isn't always one single perfect answer.
Absolutely. And that often involves making trade-offs. Sometimes you have to bite the bullet, as they say. You accept some slightly awkward or negative consequence of holding a particular view because overall you find the view compelling for other reasons.
Pragmatic, in a way.
Very much so. And then there's this process called reflective equilibrium. It's like tuning an instrument. You start with your general theories or principles, and you test them against your judgments about specific concrete cases.
Okay.
If there's a clash, you might adjust the theory or maybe rethink your judgment about the specific case. You go back and forth, aiming for this state of coherence, this equilibrium between your abstract principles and your real-world intuitions. It's how we often refine our moral and political beliefs over time.
Let's try and ground some of this in a really iconic figure, Socrates. His life and, well, his death seem to really exemplify this whole philosophical quest. What do our sources tell us about him?
Right. Well, Socrates himself didn't write anything down, which is fascinating. So what we know comes mainly from his student, Plato, through his famous dialogues. Also accounts from Xenophon and the playwright Aristophanes. But yeah, Plato's dialogues are key. And Socrates' trial and execution in Athens back in 399 BCE for supposedly corrupting the youth and undermining the gods, that event is absolutely central to understanding his philosophy and why it resonated so much.
And that famous story about the Oracle of Delphi, the one where he was declared the wisest man, that fits in here, right?
Yes, exactly. The story goes, the oracle declared no one was wiser than Socrates. And Socrates was apparently completely baffled by this.
You didn't think he was wise?
Not at all. So he set out to basically disprove the oracle. He went around questioning people who had a reputation for wisdom, politicians, poets, skilled craftsmen. And he found that they all thought they knew many things, but under questioning, it turned out they didn't really know them at all. Whereas he, Socrates, was at least aware of his own ignorance. He knew that he didn't know.
So his wisdom was actually in recognizing the limits of his own knowledge. That's quite a profound realization for anyone seeking understanding, really.
He concluded the oracle didn't mean he knew a lot, but that human wisdom is worth little or nothing, and he was wisest only because he realized this fundamental limit. It's a huge lesson. Humility is crucial in the face of how much we don't know.
And that realization led him to that famous declaration, "The unexamined life is not worth living." What did unexamined really mean for Socrates? It sounds intense.
It is intense, and it means much more than just, casual reflection now and then. First, their self-examination. Deeply inspired by that inscription at Delphi, "Know thyself," Socrates believed we have to relentlessly investigate our own beliefs, our own knowledge, appreciate its limits, strive to root out inconsistencies. An unexamined life for him was one just run on autopilot, dictated by untested, unexamined, maybe even contradictory beliefs.
Okay, so looking inward, what about the world around us?
Yes, it also involves the examination of nature. Now, Socrates himself focused more on ethics and virtue than, say, cosmology like Thales did. But he was certainly aware of the scientific ideas of his day. Being curious about the world, using reason to investigate how things work, that's also part of a life worth living. And crucially, it's about understanding the limits of knowledge. If you're not aware of what you don't know, you won't even try to seek it out. And asserting knowledge you don't really have can be dangerous. Think about errors in technical fields, or just how it fuels polarization in moral and political debates when people are convinced they're right without good reason. For Socrates, refusing to examine, refusing to learn, was like refusing to truly live.
And the Socratic method, his whole style of questioning, that was his main tool for this examination, wasn't it?
He wouldn't lecture, he'd just ask questions, constantly probing. He famously compared himself to a midwife.
Midwife.
Yeah, saying he didn't have wisdom himself, but he could help others give birth to their own understanding, their own truths, through this process of self-discovery prompted by his questions. He didn't just hand over knowledge, he helped people find it within themselves.
What about his actual moral principles? Some of them sound, well, pretty radical when you first hear them.
They do, yeah. But when you dig into them, they offer some really deep insights. Take Socrates' harm principle. It basically has two main parts. First, no one willingly chooses what is harmful to themselves.
Really? People choose bad things all the time.
Well, Socrates believed they choose those things out of ignorance. They think it will bring them some kind of good, even if it's short-sighted or ultimately self-destructive. If they truly deeply understood the real consequences, the true harm, they wouldn't choose it.
So he thought wrongdoing stemmed mainly from a lack of knowledge, not from, actual malice.
Pretty much, yeah. Ignorance of the true good.
Yeah.
And his second principle is maybe even more challenging. When a person does harm to others, they actually harm themselves.
How does that work?
Because Socrates believed the greatest harm isn't physical pain or even death. The greatest harm is to one's own soul, one's character. Doing unjust or harmful things corrupts your character. And for him, a corrupted character was far worse than any external suffering. He argued that a truly good person couldn't actually be harmed in the most important sense, because their inner goodness, their character, remained intact.
Wow, that really resonates with some other philosophical traditions we've touched on. How does that harm principle stack up against, say, the concept of ahimsa in Indian philosophy?
Oh, it's a fascinating and really powerful comparison. Ahimsa, the Sanskrit term usually translated as non-harming or non-violence. It's a absolutely core virtue in Hindu, Jain, and Buddhist traditions.
And that idea of non-harming is taken very seriously, right?
Extremely seriously. Jain monks and nuns, for example, go to incredible lengths to avoid harming any living creature, however small. Even accidentally. They might sweep the path in front of them, filter their water. Some even practice fasting unto death as the ultimate act of non-violence and detachment. And of course, Mahatma Gandhi famously made ahimsa the absolute foundation of his nonviolent resistance movement.
So what are the specific connections to Socrates' thinking on harm?
Well, the fundamental connection is that both doctrines teach that harming others ultimately harms yourself. In Indian philosophy, this is often explained through concepts like karma, the law of cause and effect that operates across lifetimes, and samsara, the cycle of rebirth. Committing violence or causing harm generates negative karma, which binds a soul more tightly to suffering in this life and future lives. Hurting another being is, in a sense, like hurting a part of yourself because of this deep interconnectedness of all beings.
And that role of ignorance, is that central to both as well?
Absolutely. Both Socrates and Indian philosophical schools connect harm directly to ignorance. For Socrates, as we said, evil actions stem from ignorance of what is truly good. For many Indian traditions, suffering and the impulse to harm arise from avidya ignorance, specifically ignorance of the true nature of reality, leading to attachment to temporary things, desires, aversion. The remedy is enlightenment, wisdom recognizing the impermanent nature of things and the chain of causes. So while the metaphysical frameworks might differ, karma and rebirth versus the focus on the soul's character, there's this profound shared insight. Ignorance breeds harm, and harming others inevitably recoils upon the self.
What a journey, really, from those ancient sages all across the globe, through the rigorous methods of logic and conceptual analysis we talked about, right up to Socrates' powerful call for examined life and his really challenging harm principle. We've definitely gotten a much clearer picture of what philosophy is all about.
Yeah, and while contemporary academic philosophy can seem highly specialized, maybe even a bit daunting, its core motivation really hasn't changed. It's still about trying to make sense of things in the broadest possible way, to understand, as Sellers put it, how things hang together. It's that deep, fundamental human quest that's been driving thinkers for thousands of years.
And for anyone listening, this isn't just abstract stuff for academics. Our sources really show that studying philosophy, maybe even majoring in it, isn't just for people who want to become professors. It's a fantastic liberal arts foundation. It sharpens your analytical thinking, your creative problem solving, your communication skills, things that are valuable absolutely anywhere.
That's so true. Philosophy majors consistently score really highly on standardized tests, like the LSAT for law school, the GMAT for business school. They end up in successful careers in law, obviously, but also business systems. Think of people like LinkedIn co-founder Reid Hoffman or former HP CEO Carly Fiorina.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah. And tech, serving on ethics boards, even hosting popular podcasts. It's really about cultivating a certain mindset, a way of thinking critically, questioning assumptions, seeing connections that empowers you in pretty much any field you go into.
It really does sound like it's about developing these habits of mind, habits that can genuinely transform how you engage with the world, encouraging you to, examine your own biases, investigate things with an open mind, and maybe ultimately gain a richer sense of who you are and your place in it all.
This deep dive, I think, really reveals that philosophy isn't just another subject you study in school. It's a dynamic, powerful way of living.
So as we wrap up, we'd like to leave you with a thought to maybe chew on. If Socrates was right, if human wisdom is ultimately worth little or nothing, and yet we feel this deep compulsion to examine our lives, to examine the world, what does this ongoing, maybe even unending quest for understanding truly mean for us, for our individual journey through life?
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the world of philosophy. Keep questioning, keep exploring.
Until next time, stay curious.